Let's start with Florida State, Georgia Tech. That is the best game on the board. It'll kick off at noon Eastern on ESPN. Florida State sitting around a 10.5 point favorite, total 55.5. Florida State favorite to win the ACC, but they did have significant roster turnover on both sides of the ball. Georgia Tech, exciting offense, questionable defense. I think that offense, that'll be the case once again this year. I'm not sure that they addressed their defensive issues. The offense, I think, has the potential to be even better under Buster Faulkner. You saw quarterback Haynes King really start to pick up that offense. They started to implement some more things as the season went on. Now you have a full off season. So I think the offense will be electric, but can they get any stops is the question. I think we probably have differing views on this game. I got too cute. Number one, I was waiting I couldn't bet any week 0 because of my own personal challenge, but it wouldn't have mattered because the one game I wanted to bet was Georgia Tech, and I wanted it to get to 14. And it didn't get there. I'm lower on Florida State than most. One of the reasons why I like Clemson to win the ACC and Clemson to get to the college football playoff, that plays a part in that. But the reason I wanted to wait till 14 is I'm semi-concerned about the matchup in that I'm not a DJU guy. This is maybe, I don't know if this is still a DJU podcast. You'll talk about that next from your perspective. But I think that the way to beat this Florida State team, and by the way, someone out there either has some intel or an influential group does not like this Florida State team because this number got beat down. It's even touched 10 at some places. And then a couple hours ago, BC got hit across a key number next week against Florida State. For what it's worth, I bring this up every year, and we'll talk about this more next week, but I've wrote about this for the last 6-7 years since we started action. Teams that are playing their first game against teams that already played, and I remove FCS because it's not that efficient of a market. So teams playing their first game against teams that already played in week 0, 60-34 against the spread since 2005, 63.8%, went 4-1 last year. And the rationale there is that you actually have tape on your opponent. So that outweighs the rust that you're able to shake off. And by the way, you don't have to worry about travel, right? You're not going to overseas. And that cuts into your prep time, and you get extra time to prepare for one opponent. So keep that in mind next week. I'll have an article, as I always do, about those specific games and my thoughts. But when it comes to this specific game, when looking to fade Florida State this year, I want teams that can stop their ground game and force DJU to throw in known passing situations. And I'm just not sure Georgia Tech has the horses to do that. This is a team that was bottom 5 nationally in standard down success rate. So, I just have concerns that, look, Florida State's going to have a lot of talent on that defense. I know that they lost a lot of guys to the pros, but they still have a lot of talent. They're going to be able to get some stops. And is Georgia Tech just not going to be able to get any stops because they can't stop the run? And that's going to set up the play action. Because I think that the way to stop this Florida State offense, because of some of DJU's deficiencies, is to stop the run on early downs. Not sure the Ramblin' Wreck can do that. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot of things. You and I both had differing approaches, like where we wanted to get the team that we wanted to get, and we were trying to make a case for it. And I think both of us are kind of like, what the heck is going on in the market right now? And you're right. BC getting hit against Florida State, Georgia Tech opened 13.5. I believe there was a flicker of a 14 sometime during the summer. But once this thing got to 11.5, I started sending birds in the air earlier this week. Like, what is going on? It's week 0, week 1. Just be prepared, guys. There's going to be first half suspensions. There's going to be full game suspensions. But in this case, the only thing that we can find is that offensive coordinator Alex Atkins is going to serve a 3-game suspension for recruiting violations. Now, does that mean anything here? I don't think it does, because we'll go through unit by unit here. But the crux of this game is this Florida State offensive line. DJU and his 1,100 yards he has career on the ground, and Roydell Williams, 3.4 yards after contact, getting transferred in from Bama. 190 starts on this offensive line, 90% of the snaps from last year. they should dominate the Georgia Tech defensive front. This is supposed to be the worst linebacking core in all of the ACC. The defensive line isn't too far back. And what does Florida State run all the time? Alex Atkins loves outside zone. He loves counter. So the first thing you want to do is go to that Georgia Tech defense and say, well, can they defend outside zone? Can they defend counter? Well, that really comes down on your edge rushers. And when you look at this, Sylvian Yojon, 27 snaps last year. He had 300 the year before. Not even replacement level numbers. He's on the depth chart as number one. Then Romello Height is listed as the rush edge on the depth chart for this game. Just a few hundred career snaps at Auburn and USC, nothing above replacement level production. There is nothing on the defensive end says Georgia Tech's going to be able to defend outside zone run by DJU and Roydell Williams, which I'm glad Roydell Williams is going to get a full carry load here because he was pretty explosive when he ran for Bama. Then you look at the linebackers, the depth is a major issue. Now remember, this is a new defensive coordinator for Georgia Tech. Tyler Santucci comes in. This is the first time he's ever been a defensive coordinator. So that's another thing for Georgia Tech. He's going to implement the 4-2-5 because he's been at Texas A&M. He's been at Duke. He's a Mike Elko disciple. You're going to see that. But Mike Elko's best 4-2-5s is when they have great linebackers. We don't have that here. Trinelius Tatum had 26 tackles, a very high 17% missed tackle rate last year. It's unacceptable. Kyle Efford had 51 tackles, high tackling grade, probably the worst coverage rating on the entire team. If you look on PFF, if you like that kind of stuff. So I don't see what's stopping Florida State here. We're not asking DJU to throw down the field. I don't think most of the third downs are going to be longer than 3rd and 4. This tandem here with this offensive line should be able to absolutely plow through these defensive ends. When you go to the other side of the ball, Stuck, that's
when he does throw, like he's going to be throwing. It's like Oregon State last year when Oregon State was able to run, right?
Yeah,
and run it well. DJU throwing with play action is perfectly capable. It's which he'll be able to do that on some early downs here. Norvell's a good play caller. It's that if you're stopping their run and then forcing him to throw, and there's our questions with that receiver for Florida State, and you're forcing him to throw when the defense knows you have to throw. That's where I have questions with Florida State this season. But I'm not sure that, like as you said, Georgia Tech has the horses to make them do that because the strength of this team is their offensive line, as you mentioned, their backfield, and their ground game. And Georgia Tech just doesn't have the horses to really slow that down.
I think the other thing from Oregon State for DJU is also he increased his average depth of target for his career number. He increased it by like 2 yards. Now, I know there's a lot of play action involved. There's a lot more deeper shots. His big time throw rate spiked last year. So could be, a product of the Oregon State offense and that great rushing attack that they had. Could be a product of Pac-12 defenses. But DJU had career numbers at Oregon State. So we'll see if that applies here. I just don't see resistance. On the other side of the ball, you can make a case. You can make a case for Georgia Tech easily. I mean, the offense is going to move the chains with quarterback Haynes King and with running back Jamal Haynes. Buster Faulkner, I don't know how he's the offensive coordinator here, soon to be a head coach, soon to be one of the best coordinators it's mentioned in households from here on out. He called a 55% rush last year, heavy zone option, some inside zone, more than, Florida State runs the outside. This will be inside zone. And he had about 120 rushing attempts called last year using counter. So a lot of the same philosophies that Florida State runs. The offensive line isn't near as strong as Florida State's. 67% return of snaps. The center and the right tackle are there. Everything else, a little bit of, names kind of filling in the holes here. The offensive line was top 25 in rushing success rate. So with Florida State and the losses they've had, you think of Jared Verse and some of the others, they have big names that are filling these holes. They have transfers from Georgia at edge. They have names. They have players. They have names. They have pedigree. Not a ton of experience here, but this Georgia Tech offensive line was top 25 in rushing success rate. And they were top 25 in first touch, like first contact, touched after the line of scrimmage. So they were moving the ball last year. And the strength of the FSU defense is the secondary. It is an elite secondary. Where I go with Haynes King and Jamal Haynes, when you get these teams that are so good at running inside zone or counter, and they get free out in space, let's just say that the offensive line beats the Florida State front seven. This is a secondary that tackles great in space. Absolutely tackles great in space. They're good in coverage. They're good just about everywhere. The secondary ranked as the best coverage unit nationally in on-target ball. Now, I love on-target rate because that determines if your wide receivers have a clean catch in the numbers in stride. Florida State's secondary last year was number 1 in the nation at stopping teams from throwing a clean ball to a wide receiver in stride. So you look at what Georgia Tech and what Haynes King has from a passing perspective, The ground game is the best part of their offense, not really the passing attack. So to me, Stuck, this handicap comes down to, can Florida State stop the ground attack of King and Haynes? And, if they can tackle in space in the secondary, they're going to eliminate explosive plays. I think that's number 19. SP Plus makes it 19. Sagarin came out this week. They make it 14.5. I don't know if this is Alex Atkins. I don't know if there are suspensions. I don't know if there's just a lot of hate for Florida State because they're not going to be what they were last year. But when you just base it purely upon Florida State's ground game against Georgia Tech's front seven, this isn't even going to be close. So I'm taking Florida State. I got -11. I'd still hit it at 10.5, because I mean, what's Georgia Tech have in third downs, third and long? Not much. What do they have in their front six, front seven, their defensive front, with Tyler Santucci coaching his first game ever as a defensive coordinator? To me, it's just too much. I don't think it's a big thing that Alex Atkins isn't coaching this game. They're just going to run outside zone and counter, and it's going to be a ground game with DJU. I mean, that's the variable we know that is going to be there, and I'm going to bet Florida State here. -11 is what I got. I'd still take 10.
You're way, way, way higher than me, but I'm going to need probably 14 or better live. That's the number I wanted originally. So that's probably what I'm going to wait for in that one.